Welcome. Thank you for viewing this pre-recorded webinar titled Supporting Those Whose Skills Are No Longer in Demand. My name is Kathleen E. I am a certified career services provider as well as an instructor for the National Career Development Association's Facilitating Career Development Program. I am going to go through this PowerPoint, and then from there I'm going to show you some resources that are relevant to this topic. And I encourage you to check these out at your own time if this is a subject that is of interest to you. Today's world of work is changing so fast that it affects people's jobs, resulting in job loss in multiple industries. Should displaced workers try to find other employment, they may discover limited prospects with their current skill set. Career development professionals who support these people must understand the challenges they face. And so this session will include information and resources to help your students and clients navigating the changing workplace. Now, before I begin on this topic, I want to give a disclaimer that this was brought up at this time because of the idea that with the federal government letting go a lot of federal workers, this is something this population may be dealing with. However, this particular webinar is intending to address a general population, not just the federal workers. And traditional people in this population are likely to be seasoned workers. And this webinar is not attempting to address the challenges unique to the current displaced federal worker situation. That issue is too recent and emergent to analyze. The demographic information for that population is unknown, but it is likely to be very diverse. What I'd like to do is give a little historical context as to how this topic came about as a webinar and or workshop. First, some family history that kind of helped bring this to fruition. My grandfather, my father's father, was a young man when the Great Depression started. He was working as an accountant. He had a wife and a young daughter. And shortly after the Depression started, he wound up losing his job due to nepotism. And then he spent a few years where he could not find another job, no matter how hard he tried. It was very stressful for him. And he has told this story over and over again. I remember hearing this story repeatedly as a child. And it was very stressful for him. And eventually it got to the point when the New Deal came about that they were putting people to work to build roads and bridges and things like that. And so he was eventually able to do that. But I remember him telling the story that one time he was so desperate to be able to support his family that he considered going out and robbing a bank or something so that he'd go to jail and they would support his wife and his child. And then I guess eventually as time got better, he decided to get a job as a mailman, and he stayed in that job until he retired. He was rather traumatized by that whole experience and cared only about job security at that point. Then my father, his son, he was in the Navy right out of high school, and he went through their typical testing, and they noticed he had certain talents, which eventually led him down the path of working on computers as a computer programmer. He was one of those old school programmers who knew how to do Fortran and COBOL. And he basically, his career throughout his adult life was, he was a systems analyst where he designed databases. And he loved his job. He was very good at it, and he was well respected. The last job he worked at, he was working for a friend of his. It was a company that would print business forms for their clients on things like invoices, purchase orders, checks, and things like that. And around what I also described in his story is that he was one of the guys who created the Y2K problem. for those people who remember that. Around the late 1990s and the turn of the century, the Y2K issue was a major issue going on. And that was also about the time at the dawn of the internet, where no longer did companies need to depend on printed business forms such as purchase orders and invoices, etc. And they started processing transactions online. So eventually, I'm not exactly sure what happened. Maybe the company folded or something, but my dad found himself unemployed when he was nearly 60 years old. I don't remember exactly when this was, but it would have been in the late 90s. When he told me he was unemployed and I'm watching him and think about trying to get another job, he was sitting there trying to learn the latest and greatest programming language. And it was just kind of, I guess, frustrating, demoralizing to him to have to learn a new language at his age, at almost 60 years old. So he just decided he was going to retire. And I remember encouraging him. I said, Dad, Y2K is a really hot issue. You could go out and earn, $500 an hour going around fixing people's computer systems. He just said, no, 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 I'm done. I'm going to retire, even though that was not what he wanted to do years earlier. He just decided he was done. And then my own situation came up. I graduated from high school in 1979. And when I was in high school, like most people, I just followed in somebody else's footsteps. And I went and took typing and shorthand classes, 10 key, things like that. And I remember my typing teacher telling us, if you can type 50 words a minute, you will always be guaranteed a job. Because that was the thinking in that day, that typing fast was a high in-demand skill in the 70s. So I went out in the working world and I got a few clerical jobs. And the last clerical job I had for 9 years. And I was working for a division of GTE. They are now called Verizon. And when I started working there, they had just taken over that plant. The company had just, they at one point had up to 1,000 people, and the plant was sold off, and they had reduced their staff down to 500 when I started working there. I was there for 9 years as a department secretary for the computer department. And during those 9 years that I worked there, they went through multiple organizational restructurings and institutional upheavals. And so by the time I left, in 1997, they were down to 200 people. So I had seen several people lose their jobs while I was working there. And the company was a really good company. Most of my colleagues, it was a great experience. It was very family oriented, and there were many people whose whole families worked there for generations. So working for this company, and many of these people, highly skilled press operators and such, a lot of them didn't speak English, and this is the only job they ever knew. However, when they were about to lay me off, the company, I'd been there a long time, and what they hired me for, they no longer needed. So they decided to lay me off. And when I saw that, I started thinking they'd given me 6 weeks notice and offered me a severance package. I started considering my options. I thought about looking for another job in that facility, but I realized by this time the company was anticipating that, as they would put it, they don't anticipate printing phone books 10 years from now. So I realized, if I just wait till they shut the place down, I'll be 45 and unemployed and with unmarketable skills. I started looking at other facilities, and I even started looking at other careers within the company, and decided that was not a good future. In the meantime, I had been going to school part-time at the community college for 18 years, trying to get through my associate's degree. I had recently transferred to the university, to Cal Poly Pomona, and I had just declared my major in communication with an emphasis in public relations. And that's when I got laid off. So what I decided, the best thing I could do, because I realized my classes were only offered during the day, and I realized no employer would want to hire a secretary who needed to take time off during the day to go to school. So I decided the best thing I could do was just quit working full time and try to go to school and finish my degree and prepare myself for a new career. And at that point, even though it took me 18 years in the community college, by this point I was mature and highly motivated, and I had a major that I absolutely fell in love with. And so, since they were on the quarter system, I was able to finish 120 units in 2 years. In my time at Cal Poly Pomona, as I was learning about communication, I started seeing a disconnect between um, what the schools were doing and people like me and what they needed. And so that was what gave me the motivation to go into the field of student services. And I made that decision fairly quickly. And shortly thereafter, I quickly realized I needed a master's degree. So upon graduating from Cal Poly Pomona, I went straight over to Azusa Pacific University and got my master's in education with an emphasis in college student affairs. I graduated from Azusa Pacific in 2001, and I had been working, part-time, temporary internships types of jobs and volunteering and such. And about the time I graduated from APU, the state of California was going through a recession that was based on an energy crisis issue. And at that point, the governor of the time was recalled, and Arnold Schwarzenegger had become governor. And so at that point, since the economy was not good in California, education jobs were sparse and not really in demand. So I found myself as a recent grad and new professional finding it very difficult to find a job. Fast forward to about the year 2016, I had had several jobs in higher education, working in both public and private universities and two different community colleges, one for 9 years and one for I've been at since I graduated with this brief break. And as I was working at my current job at Mount San Antonio College, the department I work for, what they do is they would provide what is referred to as basic skills classes, non-transferable math, English, and study skills. And study skills was the class I taught. And around 2016 or 18, there was talk going around about how the state was trying to pass a law, AB 705, multiple measures. There was complaints that too many community colleges were putting people into remedial classes and delaying their time to degree and graduation. So they were trying to eliminate all those remedial classes. And as I'm like everybody else, I'm watching this, I'm seeing the handwriting on the wall. What do I do? I saw that a lot of my colleagues were really having a hard time with this. I was used to dealing with clients who would deal with these kinds of things, but I wasn't used to seeing clients and students. But I wasn't used to seeing my colleagues stress out when they can see that a state law is going to make their jobs not in demand. And so through that whole process, and the institution just had to respond to the changing laws, and they had about 20 full-time faculty. Almost all of them were encouraged to go into another department if they had the appropriate master's degree to teach in a different academic discipline. And those who didn't have an appropriate master's degree had to go back and get a second master's degree. The adjuncts, almost all of them left. They had about 40 adjuncts. And so during this time, I was just watching how everyone was reacting. And it just, I was really struck by that. And I watched the situation and I saw the handwriting on the wall. And I had come to the point where I realized that what I needed from that job was just a little more stability. So that's when I asked them to put me in the role I'm in. I've also had several friends and colleagues and neighbors who found themselves in similar situations where, the labor market is such that their skills are not in demand. And through my professional experience, as I said, I was a counselor and an educator at another community college, and I taught all of their core classes, including career and life planning. I also worked in their career center for 2 years during the Great Recession. And during that time, because people were having such a hard time getting jobs, I had started a faith-based support group at my local church. And I have also been a guest speaker at a local American Job Center / Career One Stop. And there are several versions of this workshop, and the first one I created for the local faculty in my department when I saw how they were reacting to this AB 705 multiple measures. And I went to my dean, and she suggested I talk to my faculty union and work with them. So he and I pulled together the first version of this workshop, and if anyone's interested, it will be on my website that you can see. And again, then in about the same time, I presented this topic to the California Career Development Association. I think it was 2018 or 19. And then in 2025, with our new administration, we're seeing thousands of federal workers get laid off, and the NCDA responded by asking those of us who are on there, who are credential holders, if we would be willing to offer our services pro bono. And I responded to them, and then I said, hey, I have this workshop I could offer via Zoom, not a big deal. It's already created. I just need to update it for today's meeting. They were very thrilled to have that, and hence here we are now. So again, this is my experience and what led up to creating this topic. So when I pulled this together, I had made the assumption that my audience would largely be trained career services providers. And so there is a second website and a second PowerPoint and that's what this particular topic is aimed at. But there is also a web page and a PowerPoint that is targeted directly at the clients. So I would encourage you to check that out when you get a chance. And like I said, this topic with this particular PowerPoint and webinar, I'm going to go over some of the key ideas that's available for the clients, but I don't go into detail because I'm making the assumption that most of the people who are watching this webinar are skilled in career development. Okay, and for those who are not, you're still welcome to watch this, but I would encourage you to check out the client-facing webpage and PowerPoint for more detailed information. Okay, so what I want to start with, again, based on my own experience and my years of working with people who are unemployed, is I want to encourage those of you who are working with this population to really know who you're dealing with, especially in a world of diversity. Depending on who they are, where they're coming from, they're likely going to need different things. So I'd like to encourage you to really know who your audience is. And remember that one size does not fit all. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. I know I have been through several training situations where somebody's trying to teach coping strategies, and this is just a personal example. And a lot of times people might offer something artistic, like painting or drawing or poetry or, creating some artistic endeavor. The problem for me, I always hated those kind of supposed coping strategies because my personality type, my preferences are intuitive thinking, and I have always known I am not artistically inclined. And anytime somebody expects me to do something artistic, the only thing it does is it makes me feel incompetent because the stuff I create is awful. So that is not an effective. It may be appropriate for some people. My experience has been those with intuitive feeling preferences. They often do have that creative side, but I do not. So that's, again, just one example of one size does not fit all. And when I show you some of my resources, one of them is a handout titled Know Your Audience. We'll get to that in a bit. The next thing I'd like you to do is take the time to understand the challenges these people are dealing with. And the following slides will give more detailed information about what they're dealing with. Another thing I'd like you to do to know how to help these people is familiarize yourself with the client-facing content when skills are no longer in demand. Meet them where they are, address their concerns. I am presuming that many of the people who will be watching this video will have some kind of job search coaching job. If they come to you and they're asking you for a resume or interview help, by all means, give it to them because that's why they're there. But many people, especially those in workforce development, are likely going to encounter people who can't function because they're dealing with all their emotional reactions. So just whatever it is, wherever they're at, just meet them there. Okay. Another thing, help them identify their needs and their priorities. And that's one of the handouts I'm going to show you in a few minutes called Needs of the Unemployed. Encourage them to develop effective coping strategies because this is a very, as you will soon see, this is a very stressful season for people to go through. And for those of you who have been trained in counseling skills, just use your helping skills to support them. The last comment, the last suggestion I want to offer, but with a word of caution. If it's appropriate, encourage them to find meaning and purpose in this. For example, in my case, going through this process really gave me a sense of purpose for my life, anticipating a day like today would happen. So if this is appropriate, that's fine. I would encourage you to share that with them. But somebody who's in crisis does not want to hear this. That can be very offensive. So just think before you consider encouraging them to find purpose in this. Okay. During my undergraduate and graduate studies, I was very interested in this subject. Who are the people who, find themselves unemployed? And the phrase I used was unemployed and unmarketable. And I did several research projects during my studies on that subject. And those papers are listed on my website, so you're welcome to check them out. But the bottom line is, generally speaking, and research and my experience kind of shows is that this transition is going to be greater for some people than others. And the people who typically have a hard time adjusting to challenges are people who are often over 40 years old, people who have less than a bachelor's degree, and long-term employed, especially if they've only been in one position. If they've been in the same position for 10, 20 years, this is a major adjustment for them. So just keep that in mind if you encounter these people. Just be patient and recognize that they're going to need extra support. So now what I want to do is share with you the common reactions that many people will have in this situation. And when I was doing guest speaking and presenting this topic at the Career One Stop Center, I would present all these challenges and not tell them assume that everybody is dealing with this. I would just simply say any combination thereof. And when I would, and what was interesting is after I was done, I would ask them to turn and speak to each other and, compare notes and ask them, how many of these things can you relate to? And they would say all of the above. So these are very common responses. And I broke them down into 3 sets. The first one is they have emotional reactions towards the job, the employer, and the career. Oftentimes they're overwhelmed and unable to keep up with the rapid change. I can tell you, just trying to update my materials and get everything ready for this presentation and registering how much the world has changed since I left the classroom, that was overwhelming me. And I know about all this stuff. I can just imagine what these people are dealing with. A lot of times they feel betrayed. I gave my life, and I can't tell you how many times I heard my coworkers at GTE say this kind of thing. I gave the best years of my life to this company. Now you're just letting me go. How could you? So they feel betrayed by the job. They're often going through transitions, which the author of the book that I'm referring to is, I think his name was William Bridges, and it was a great book. He defines transitions as endings, where you're dealing with disengagement, disidentification, disenchantment, disorientation. Then you have the neutral zone. The old life has ended and the new life has not yet begun. And then after the neutral zone, you can have a new beginning. And this is what I saw a lot with my colleagues when they passed this law and they're encouraging them to go into other departments. And some of them had to go get second master's degree. They were very stressed and bothered because they had a lot of stuff going on. And I heard a lot of people say, "Oh, but I love this department. This is home. This is my family. I don't want to leave." And when somebody's in a place like that, they just have a hard time imagining a future because they have not yet let go of their current life. Another thing they could be dealing with is grief over the possibility of losing their job, their friends' identity, and lifestyle. And for those of you who've been trained in grief, that involves denial, anger, bargaining, sadness, and acceptance. A lot of people will wind up resent the possibility of having to start over. I have built my life on this job, and now I have to start over and earn minimum wage. You've got to be kidding. A lot of people regret prior education, career, and life choices. I don't remember where I read this, but there was one article that I read that surprised me. It said people with bachelor's degrees, when they're having a hard time getting a job, they think to themselves, why did I waste my time getting this degree if it won't give me a job? They tend to take things personally. You did this to me. You took away my job, my livelihood. So, and I would imagine with all the political strife we have going on right now with the new administration, there are probably a lot of people who are having emotional reactions to that. Again, I don't have any research to identify what that population looks like and what they're dealing with. I can just guess, make an educated guess. In addition to the reactions they have towards the job, many people have personal reactions, including a lot of people are shocked, and when they lose their job, they don't see it coming. It's often unexpected. They're lost and they don't know what to do. In my case, number one, I saw when I got laid off from GTE, I saw the handwriting on the wall. I could see how everything they hired me to do was being replaced by machines. My problem when I found myself going to school, I had just lost my predictable paycheck and I didn't know how I was going to pay my house payment, my car payment, and all that kind of thing. So what I was looking for was strategy, and there was nobody who was able to do that to me. A lot of times people have unmet expectations. Imagine someone like my grandfather who decides to give up his career as an accountant to become a mailman because he assumes that's going to provide job security. A lot of people, I thought I was going to retire from this job, and the rug gets pulled out from underneath them when they're in their late 50s or early 60s. Some people could have experience a paradigm shift where, their reality was, I'm going to retire from this job, and now suddenly, again, I'm unemployed. What do I do now? And then there's stress, anxiety, the fear of the unknown, the fear of the loss of livelihood, the feelings of loss of control. When the employer ends your job, you don't have any control over it. Hopelessness, helplessness, worthless, useless, and some people wind up having a crisis of faith. This may or may not relate to religion. What I'm referring to here is a book that is on the website on faith development theory. And this is basically, you've put your faith in something, such as I put my faith in the fact that this job would be here until I'm ready to retire. So that's another emotional challenge some people could be dealing with. And then people will usually have challenges with the loved ones in their life. Their unemployment stresses out their loved ones as well, because the others are often very worried about paying the rent and the mortgage and, getting food on the table and things like that. And the rest of the world tends to judge people if you've been unemployed for any length of time, making the assumption that you're not doing enough. Well, if you just did this and if you just did that, you would have a job right now. People often get pressured to just get a job. For me, it took me a year and a half because of the time of year I was laid off to get my financial aid. And so the summer before that, I had gotten to the point where my severance package had wiped out and I had no money to live on for 3 months. And I had, not knowing to anticipate that, I had to take my statistics class because I didn't take it earlier. And so I thought, well, I'll just take it through the summer to get it over with. And I was, just trying to get through statistics in 6 weeks when I didn't know how I was going to get food and pay my bills and things like doing laundry and gas in the car and all that. And I just remember one time saying, I am so stressed out that I can't even function, and you want me to learn statistics in 6 weeks? And the response I got was, precisely. And what would you do if you had children to feed? And so at the time, the lady who was leading my small group in my church referred me to the pastor. They went to put me on the food uh, program, their grocery giveaway. And when she told the pastor about it, he contacted me and said, "Oh, well, it's time to get a job." And I just, clearly you haven't taken the time to understand what's going on. And I just lost respect for him at that point. And so another thing is you often get endless, unhelpful, and unwanted advice. Oh, just do this, apply for this job, apply. And a lot of times the jobs people refer you to are just not even relevant. And again, these are things that just add to your stress. And so again, you have increased stress, conflict, and tensions with others. When I was reviewing these papers I wrote as the one I wrote for grad school, I interviewed somebody who works in the CTE program, where they retrain people. And she had pointed out that when I was asking her what challenges they face, a lot of times the family members, if they're trying to get retraining, they don't appreciate that. They just want them to just get a job again so they can pay the rent. So the question at this point is, what can you do? You can help them evaluate their situation and clarify what's happening. Because a lot of times, when a person is facing job loss with obsolete skills, they may see that coming. They can often see the handwriting on the wall and the red flags and all that. And so they could be stressing out before they've actually lost their job. So clarify, and maybe they try to go out and start applying for jobs before they actually get laid off. So a couple of things you want to do is help them identify, are they currently working still? And if they still have a job, and if their desire is to maintain their current job, then don't take the changes they're going through personally or get defensive. Don't resist change, even if those changes are unwanted, and cooperate with leadership's efforts to respond to change. When I worked in the computer department at GTE, but when I got there, they had old mainframe computers with terminals, and they eventually went to PCs. And I remember one of the old school programmers saying, "Oh, yeah, that's not a real computer. I'm not going to program on that thing because that's not a real computer." So he spent quite a bit of time. And I remember my colleagues complaining all he did was sit there and play solitaire all day on his PC. That was the only thing that thing was good for. And then, sure enough, with one of the rounds of layoffs came around, he was the first one who got laid off, and he was shocked. He did not see that coming. Everyone else did, but he didn't. Okay. And the other thing too is if you have a job and it's likely you're going to keep your job, cooperate, because fighting them when you're trying to implement these changes, that just irritates people. I remember saying that to some person in leadership who had just gone through this process, and I said that just pisses people off, and she couldn't stop it. Okay. So if they decide their priority is they want to stay in their job, cooperate and adapt. Now, what we're going to talk about is for those people whose jobs have already ended and they don't have the option to, cooperate and stay with the job. So now is time for them to consider their options. Okay, there's a few options they have. And the first one, if for the most part, their current skills, for the most part, what they offer is in demand, such as someone like my dad being a database designer. That was definitely, a skill that was in demand. He just needed to learn the latest and greatest programming language. Okay. If your employer is not shutting down, can look around and see if there are other positions within your organization. I know there were several faculty and staff members when my department went through a major restructuring, wound up getting jobs outside of our department in other departments on campus. And they're all still in their jobs. So look for opportunities within your industry. If it's an industry that's around, In that case, what you want to do is focus on your technical skills. Something like I said, someone like my father, he's an IT person. He's a programmer. He knows how to do all that stuff. You just need to learn the latest and greatest programming language. Another option, there is a book by a man by the name of Lawrence Shotkin called Sequel Careers. And this option is going to be most appropriate for seasoned workers who like their skill set, they like their industry knowledge, and they want to do something different with it. Okay. And he basically talked about there are several categories of jobs that can use their skill set, like management, teaching, advocacy, standards enforcement, communications, sales, and brokerage. Perfect example of this, what I'm noticing when I watch the news is there are a lot of um, federal attorneys and various people who have gotten jobs as journalists as they're reporting on all these changes going on in the government. You know, people are former FBI agents and people like that talking it, clarifying, breaking down what's happening. You can look for opportunities outside of your industry. And in that case, what they want to do is they want to focus on their transferable skills. And to give an example of where that can be very handy, my current role at Mount SAC, I'm still an instructor, I'm just not a classroom instructor. My job is I am the instructor on duty who is there to supervise tutoring and the all campus computer lab in that same department I'm working in. And what I've discovered is, especially in the computer lab, my former life as a secretary has come in very handy. It means that I'm very proficient on word processing and Microsoft Office and all these software programs. That allowed me to create several technology-based workshops. It also means that I'm able to help students who are not as proficient on their computer skills. And so I've let my colleagues know if you encounter anyone who needs help with something like Word, like how do I format my references and things like that, just send them my way. I'd be more than happy to help them. Another way my skills have come in really handy is one thing that came out of this transition is I was a driving force behind a team of people who developed a very robust student academic success workshop program where since we're no longer funneling everybody to a study skills class, we've set up a workshop program where students can just come in for 30 minutes and get some key ideas. And my organizational skills were really, really handy because, I started that job right before COVID and we had handouts in the office and suddenly we're working from home and we had to build everything from scratch. And now the program's very robust. Again, my former life as a secretary comes in very handy with that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about less conventional. Okay, another thing they can do is they can retrain for a new career. That's what I did. I went from corporate clerical to college student affairs and teaching. So they can, if this is the direction they want to go, they should explore their education and career options. And then we have some less conventional options that we're going to talk about next. Some of the less conventional options they can consider is freelancing with their current skill set. Especially nowadays, there are so many online platforms that people can use. Maybe somebody who's skilled in the artistic fields. Perhaps they can go sell their product on Etsy or something like that. You can start your own business, either for profit or non-profit. Again, I have some handouts on my website that, get people started with that process. You can capitalize on a current trend based on your current skill set. Like I said, with my dad, it's like, go out there and earn $500 an hour fixing people's computer systems. I know there are perfect examples of that in today's world, but ultimately that would be their decision. Some people can go out and just get a day job where they're just any old paycheck so that they can pursue their interests outside of work. And that can be very helpful, especially if it's a non-stressful job. They can pursue additional degrees and or training. I had one woman I knew who was a teacher during the Great Recession. And in California, the education department was hit really hard. So there were many teachers who were out of work, and it took them a while to get back into their teaching jobs. And this woman, she just kept going to school and acquiring more and more credentials. So that's how she spent her unemployed time. Again, you can retrain for a new career. I'd heard about somebody who worked in law enforcement and is now looking at going to become a lawyer. Some people, depending on their circumstances and their age, they may decide that, I'm done with this and I'm ready to retire. And the client facing PowerPoint has some resources about finding out whether or not that's an appropriate option. Some people may be dealing with health and medical issues, and they may decide that their best option is to go out on medical leave or disability. Again, it's a personal decision. And then you could have some people who, especially if they're midlifers, they refer to them often, they're often the sandwich generation, where they're taking care of their children and their parents at the same time. Or, maybe as your elders, they become more dependent and you need more time for them. You could have a young person who has children at home and decides that maybe the best thing I should do right now is just become a stay-at-home parent. Or maybe somebody who has some, person in their life who's dependent and needs, full-time care. So for some people, that can be an option. And some resources that are listed on my website, I know somebody who wound up taking that route and found out that if she's willing to, and this is in California, I don't know if this is true in other states, but if she was willing to get trained, go through training, she could get paid through this person. It was her mother who needed to be taken care of through the mother's Medicaid to get paid to be the parent's caregiver. So again, I put those resources on there. The caveat is, that's all dependent on everything going on, but that's a potential option. The person is willing to put out the work to get trained. So now let's talk about how you can help them take action. Hopefully you've helped them deal with whatever emotional reactions they're having, and now they're ready to say, okay, what do I do now? First thing you can do is know the options they can consider. And again, I encourage you to, the other PowerPoint is more in depth, gives more detailed information. Another thing you can do is help them understand the concept of labor market trends. My experience has been, coming from a world of non-career development people, most people do not understand the concept of labor market trends. Most people, when they look at a job, they think to themselves, the first thing they're thinking is, could I retire from that job? And they don't realize that maybe this job is just for a season for a reason. It doesn't occur to them that company may not be around when they're ready to retire. And one of my handouts that is on the webpage is a concept handout called Understanding Labor Market Trends. And so you can, if you want to check that out or if you want to encourage them to check it out, it gives tips for what do you do when those trends are affecting your job. Help them recognize the need to pivot. Sometimes they're just so focused on, the job they've always done, they may not register that they may need to take a slight direction. And that's what I did going into this position I'm in now. Some people may need help in deciding what direction to go. And again, that's where you can use your career development and counseling skills. And then the most important thing to remember is this is their decision to make. In the 20 plus years since I've been exposed to the idea of workforce development and career development in higher education, I have seen that over the time, there has been a better, these different industries are trying to collaborate and work together to meet the needs of this population. One of the concerns I have is that too often it's what jobs are available and we can push them into it. And if you've got somebody who's burned out and was never good at that job and you try to push them into another job or try to push them into retraining for a job they don't want to do, you're going to run into all kinds of challenges. Okay? So this is their decision. And what I often tell my students is when you've made the right choice for the right reasons, you will be willing to do what you need to do to make it happen. So just remember, this is their decision to make. And then finally, for those of you who do the job search as your skill set, this will be music to your ears. Common sense is help them develop effective job skills, because people who have poor job search skills, they tend to get rejected a lot, and that's just going to make their emotional state even worse. So, if that's your skill set, great. If not, find somebody who does have that skill set. So the question is, how can you prepare to help them? Based on everything I've been through, like I said, through research, I was, pleasantly just surprised to see all these institutions that are trying to work together. But a lot of times the individual shouldn't have to go through as much work as I did just to find these answers. So what I would encourage you to do is help them. The trick here is help them get the right help from the right person at the right time. And the way you can do that is identify what resources your institution already provides. Identify what resources your institution can realistically add. An example of that is right around the time of the pandemic, I think right before it, a woman by the name of Sarah Rabb coined the terms food and housing insecurity. And with that, she created a place called the Hope Center, and I included a link where she's just getting the word out that many community college students are food and housing insecure. And in response to that, Mount SAC created a department called Basic Needs that is there to help students, get things like food and housing and things like that if that's what they need. And that department is being run by a social worker who has that kind of a background. So they were willing to add that resource. Okay. Identify what resources your institutions do not provide. Maybe it's not obviously something like if you work for a public institution, you should not be teaching what the Bible says, that kind of thing. So, think about what referrals you have, and it could be a cultural issue. Maybe the Ivy League schools, perhaps they don't need as much. The assumption is that maybe they don't have as many food and housing insecure students. So that's a priority. Identify what resources you have. Again, I send people to the different offices on campus all the time based on, whatever their situation is. And identify what resource referrals you need. Okay. And then another thing you can do is learn to connect with other providers. Identify which resources your organization provides and what resources they do not provide. Things like somebody who needs to go on a job interview and they don't have interview clothing. Sometimes some career centers have that, some don't. Is there a local nonprofit you can partner with to get your people interview clothing? Review the unemployed resources document. Again, I'm going to show you my documents in a minute. And then different types of counselors can help you identify who can help with what. Network with other resource providers and encourage your students and clients to use the resources available. Okay, so that is the end of the presentation. Now what I want to do is show you my website. This is the main page. And I have over 30 workshops I've created. When I worked in the Career Center, we discovered I have a talent for this. You're welcome to check those out. And then I also have lots of documents, written resources, another talent of mine. What I do want to let you know is that I have been in the process of migrating my computer and all my handouts to another service website hosting company, and that has caused me to change the links. And so there's a lot of broken links. I didn't want to wait to get this webinar done because it's such a timely topic. So just don't be surprised if you encounter broken links. If you do, feel free to contact me. Let me know. I'll be happy to provide you with what you need. Okay, so again, this is my website. Now, as I said, I have multiple workshops available. And this is a web page for the service providers supporting those whose skills are no longer in demand. And there's a couple of things I want to show you in here. This PowerPoint that I just showed you, you can download that. You can download it as a handout. And then these resources I'm going to show you as well. And this is where the video is from NCDA is uploading this video to their YouTube page. As I mentioned, this was the original version of When Skills Are No Longer in Demand for local faculty. And then this was a presentation I did at the CCDA conference. Several of my client-facing workshops topics would be directly relevant to this population. So if you want, you can click on the link to go to those pages, including the When Skills Are No Longer in Demand. It looks very similar to the professional-facing page, but there are some differences. So again, these are some of several of my topics, and these ones are most relevant to this particular population. This is a document created by somebody I met through the CCDA. It's a comparison between workforce development and career development, and he gave me permission to share it here. Some articles that are relevant. Again, the link to the book on sequel careers. And then, as I mentioned, I have been a key driver in, this is the web page for the workshop program that I helped create. And several of the handouts are very relevant to this population. You are welcome to download those. And I'm going to show you Know Your Audience in a minute. Okay. And then these are the papers I wrote while I was going to school and, going through my undergrad and graduate programs and saying, how do we help these people? Okay. And then, as I mentioned, the understanding labor market trends and several other of my resources, including starting your own business. So lots of resources. You're welcome to download those handouts. Now what I'm going to do is bring up some very specific handouts that I mentioned. Okay, this one, the Know Your Audience, I had made a comment to one of my colleagues one time saying that in communication, I love my undergraduate degree in communication, but they drilled this in my head. I remember when I was brand new, a student in the program, I'd just been laid off, and just to give you an example of how this process works, my professor brought in an anthropology professor and asked her to, talk about anthropology. And then we were assigned the task of creating a brochure for anthropology students. And so I didn't know what anthropology was. So I just got the catalog and pulled up the description. And I just copied the description onto the brochure. And my teacher came over and she was checking out my work and she looked at that. And she looked at me and she goes, read that out loud, that description, because I think she knew what I had done. And I read it and she goes, do you understand what that says? I said, no. And she said, how old are you? I said, I'm 35. And she goes, if you don't understand that at 35, what do you think a 17-year-old is going to understand that? And I said, no. She said, translate that into English. And she walked off. I'll never forget that. But that's what that's all about. And that starts with knowing who your audience is. Okay. And the part that would be relevant to you as you think about working with this population, here's some questions you should be asking yourself about your population. Who am I? Who are they? What do they know? What do they not know? What do they care about? What do they not care about? Okay. So again, if this is new to you, you're welcome to check this one out. This one is a 2-pager. As I said, I taught career and life planning for 9 years. And what I discovered when I was teaching that class is, you start off with the assessments and the self-awareness process. And I found that my students would get frustrated and they felt lost because they didn't know why I was making them do all this work. Why can't you just tell me what job I should do? And so I created this one to help them understand the process that they need to go through to finally get their dream job. Okay. And those of you training career development, you should be aware of this: self-awareness, options exploration, reflection, decision implementation, education and career. And then phase 5 is reevaluation and renegotiation. Basically, what do you do when life throws you a curveball? Okay, you need to reevaluate your situation. So, they like this. It helped them understand what I was doing. Sorry, my kitty's decided she's not wanting attention. Most people find that amusing, so I'll just let her stay. We're almost done. So, anyways, and they really appreciate this because it helps them understand what I'm doing to them when I'm walking them through the assessment process. Okay. Now, phase two, what I did was I took that document and what I did was I added color coding with the legend here. And this one is called Different Types of Counselors. And what's going on with this one is um, one time when I was teaching the career and life planning class, I had a student that had come to the conclusion that what she wanted is she wanted to be an elementary school teacher. I said, great. Okay, now what you need to do is go talk to your counselor for the education department so they can help you pick out your classes. And she said, hey, I thought you were my counselor. And that's when it dawned on me that students don't know the difference. Most people don't know the difference between a career counselor, an academic counselor, or an academic advisor, and mental health counselors. Or, sometimes when people are going through these crises, they may turn to their pastor or whoever their faith leader is. Okay? And then, you also have the question of how do I pay for school? That's where financial aid and financial planners come in. And so what's going on here is they have overwhelming skill sets in the helping skills, but they specialize in different parts of the process. For example, career counselors specialize in the self-awareness, who am I? How am I wired? The options exploration, and how to research your different career choices and what skills do they want to use in the job. Whereas an education counselor or an academic counselor, and this is one of the issues I have with workforce development and career development in higher education, is everybody makes the assumption the person knows what they want and they just want to throw it and say, okay, tell me your goal and let's get you an ed plan. Again, that's making the assumption they've done this process, and most people have not. Very few people have. Okay? So again, this phase of, okay, if I want to be a teacher, what classes should I take? How much education do I need? Well, especially here in California, if you want to teach elementary, junior high, high school, community college, university, they're all going to take different paths, so your education is going to be based on who you're teaching. So that's something. And again, who offers what I'm looking for? Then this phase of reflection is typically where the career counselors, part of their job is to encourage the students to reflect on what they're learning about themselves. I remember one time, I mentioned this before, I've always known that I'm not artistically inclined. And one time when I was an undergrad, I had to take a class in graphic design and we were given a particular assignment and I was just appalled at how awful my 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 project was. And then I sat there and I'm watching the work of some of my colleagues, my classmates, and some of these people, the most beautiful images, and I'm looking at what they're doing and I'm thinking to myself, if I have to compete with them for a living, I'm going to starve to death. So the question is, what skills what do you know about yourself and what skills do you want to use and not use? And that's that process. And again, this is a lot of times, this is going to be the career people. Okay, so the person decides they need to go to school for retraining. How do they know what classes to take? Again, that's where the education counselors come in. And then the job search people who specialize in interviewing, networking, resumes, and all that kind of stuff. That's a skill set that's entirely different from the exploration process. Most career development people are expected to be skilled in both, but they're likely going to specialize in one over the other. Okay. So again, and that's what all these different colors represent. And then this reevaluation, renegotiation, what that's, again, life throws you a curveball and you got to make some choices. What do you do? Or it's just a regular life's transition. And the people who would specialize in that kind of thing would be mental health, faith-based, and again, the financial counselors to help them with that process. So this is a combination. How do you find and get your dream job and different types of counselors? That is a combined document. Now, this one is going to be very helpful for you to share with your clients. And again, these handouts are available on the client-facing webpage. One of the workshops I created when I worked in the counseling center, in the career center during the Great Recession, was called Unemployed and Looking for Answers. And what that, basically what they need is information, resources, and support. And this document, again, especially if you've got somebody who's worried about putting a roof over their head or whatever, and worried about getting, I don't even know where to look for a job type of thinking, they're going to be overwhelmed. And, they might need help prioritizing, figuring out where they should be putting their energy. And that's what this document is for. So I have it broken down. There's several columns. The first column is what they need. Again, information, resources, or support. Find it. And what does this actually mean? This column is where they say, do I need this? Yes or no? And then these are where can they get the information? And the last column is my resources that they would find this helpful. So again, information about about what resources are available to help them get through this transition. Do they need information on how to do effective job search? Do they need career guidance? Because again, career guidance and job search are technically two different things. And those of you in career development, you understand this. Education guidance, choosing the right program and the right classes based on what they're trying to accomplish. This can also include academic success and study skills. That's the stuff I've been teaching for years. And what I can tell you is oftentimes when people are going back to school and they haven't been in school for a while, they often are very rusty in their study strategies and maybe even time management because they just haven't had to do this for a long time. So that could be something they're dealing with. And again, some of my resources, and most colleges have support resources for that. Goal setting, how to set effective goals and what's stopping them from achieving their goals. Resources, how do you get your needs met, like housing, so you don't wind up on the streets when you can't pay your rent. How do you pay your utilities? Where do you get some groceries? Clothing, including interview clothing, non-food supplies, other basic needs, household goods, medical needs and prescriptions. Transportation, Katie's getting impatient. Fortunately, we're almost done. Technology, a lot of times when people lose their job, they don't necessarily have the current, the latest technology skills, computers, or so they need to work on that. And I know where I am at Mount SAC, they have a laptop loaner program, as well as they, in most community colleges, offer non-credit, basic, they'll have classes on Word and PowerPoint and all that. And I'm also a contracted instructor for a local city, and they offer those classes as well. So there's several places they can go to get that information. And the American Job Centers offers that. Again, how do they pay their other bills? Child care, elder care. So as I said, a lot of people, taking care of your elders as they decline, that is overwhelming in itself. And that information can typically be found through the county office. The county offices usually have information on it. How to care for your family, pets. With the Great Recession in California, the real estate market was hit really hard. And a lot of people had, lost their homes. And I had heard that there, multiple stories of real estate agents. Okay, I have to go flip this house, this foreclosure house. I have to go put it on the market. They go to check out the house, and they find there's a dog tied up in the backyard. That the people who left were so overwhelmed they couldn't handle taking care of their animals. They just abandon them, leave them behind. And I understand why somebody's that stressed, but what I have learned through my process and journey is that there are a lot of nonprofits that are dedicated, animal rescues and things that will help people find homes for their pets. But there are also others that would much rather give you a bag of food than rehome your pet. Giving you food is easy. Rehoming your pet, that's not so easy. So if they want their pet and they're just afraid they can't take care of it, check out one of these nonprofits and see if they can get them some food. And again, it's one less thing for them to stress out over. Do they need help with job search support, education? Again, this is resources and upgrading all your credentials. A lot of times when people have been off work and if they decide they want to go back in something they've done before, maybe they haven't kept their credentials current, so they may need to go update them. Educational expenses, financial aid and all that kind of stuff. Goal setting, again, where you can get help. Other barriers such as criminal records, credit problems, drug use, and things like that. Okay? And then support. Where can they go to get help on all this stuff? So this document, again, take them through this process and do I need this? Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And then at the end of this, I encourage them to stop and reflect which of these, where are your priorities? What's most important? Somebody who's about to be evicted needs help with their housing. Whereas somebody else who's, I've had people tell me, no, financially we're okay. I'm married and we're getting by. I need to focus on looking for a job. So that person wants a job. So that's this document. Again, this one is titled Needs of the Unemployed. You can download this from my website. Okay, and then this document is called Unemployed Resources. And this is, again, identify what do you need, which you would do from the first one. And this one is where can I find that information? Keep in mind, I updated this a few days before the webinar, and a lot of the stuff is changing. And, with the government changing and everything, these could change. So, but this is recently updated. So, just check this out for yourself. Also, keep in mind that this handout, this was my target audience are Southern California. So that's where a lot of these resources are from. If you're not, if you're from another state, at least I'm giving you the idea. You can see if you have something similar in your area. Okay. So different places they can go to get help, federal and then state, things like unemployment, training benefits for people who want to get retrained, CalCobra, which is, how to extend your medical benefits from your employer. So again, lots of resources. Covered California is the California version of the Affordable Care Act. If you work for a college or your student is going to college, or many places they can look for information. Financial aid, EOP. Keep in mind, where they get their academic advising is likely to depend on what level of education they're at. Here in California, most academic advising happens in counseling center, whereas at the university, it's usually done by the academic department. One of the jobs I had when I worked at Cal Poly, and this stuff matters because I remember one of my jobs was set up advising sessions for new students. And the students, based on the trend at the time, everyone was trying to get into CIS because that was during the dot-com boom. But that program was impacted. So somebody tells them, oh yeah, just go major in history. That's easy. It's easy to get into. What they didn't understand is that at the university, once you get into your specialization, that's who's usually doing your academic advising. So these people are hoping to eventually get into CIS are finding themselves getting advising from a history professor. So that part's them, and then they're going to wind up taking classes they don't need. Basic needs, success skills classes, that can be offered by counseling or a career center if they offer them. My assumption is maybe some Ivy League schools may not offer too much of that because the assumption is their people don't need it. Again, I don't know that off the top of my head. Career and job placement centers. In most colleges, those are their career exploration and job placement / job search are housed under one department. I have encountered schools where the job placement and career exploration are two different departments. Okay, so they need to figure that out. If they need verification, like especially if they're getting job retraining benefits, where do they go for that? childcare, job placement, career placement. Some people don't realize this, but a lot of times academic departments, if you're working for the hotel department, a lot of employers will go to those academic departments to recruit students for jobs. So that's one place they can look for jobs. Campus legal clinics, if they have such. Okay, Veterans Resource Center, vocational, again, different places, and then various job boards. My experience working with those job boards, and this is what I tell my clients and students, is that those jobs can be very good. Those boards are really good at helping you learn the latest and greatest job search strategies. They're good for that. It's not always the best place to look for a job because you're competing with everyone around the world. Okay, so again, lots of resources. Decide for yourself whether or not these are relevant and appropriate. And those of you trained in career development, you should know about ONET and Occupational Outlook. They both have online versions. Check your local governments for meeting local needs. And some local libraries offer they'll offer job search support. Your pension program is a place you can turn if you're considering retiring. Local churches and places of worship often have food banks. Employer and AARP, they have resources for helping people plan for retirement, as well as they have a career side. Okay. Again, lots of resources. Check those out. And if you're not local like we are, then see if there's something local to where you are. Okay. So that's that resource. And so rather than having to figure it out yourself, at least that's a starting point. Now, this document, I'm finding something I'm thinking about, and obviously I'm seeing the students have the foresight to consider this. We're living in a world where everything is changing so much and so fast. How can you plan a long-term degree, for a career that may not be there 5 years from now? So what this is the idea of how people make career choices. There are several variables that come into play. And what I tried to do is, again, where they come together is with this Venn diagram, but separate out what's going on here. If you want something stable upon which to build your decisions, this is where career development comes in, is get to know yourself, your talents, your passions, your generation. And then some things reflect both your environment and your experience as well as inborn. This last one, the idea of exposure, I've come to realize that very few people intentionally set out to pursue a particular career. Most people just navigate to something to which they've been exposed and follow in someone else's footsteps. For me, I started off with typing in shorthand because I had a great aunt who lived with us who was a former secretary. That's where I got that idea of going into office work. So again, this stuff is what's fairly stable. Again, the exposure, I wasn't sure where to put that. But this is where higher education and career technical education come in, is the parts of you can choose to develop is your education, your career, the skills, technical and transferable, the knowledge you acquire, the experience you get. And then when people make their career choice, and this is something I see a lot, make their career choices based on perceived trends, those are the people who are going to get really frustrated. Here in California, as long as I've been working in higher ed, nursing programs have been very everywhere. They're impacted and they're hard to get in and all this. And one of the reasons why they're so impacted is everybody keeps telling people, oh, go out and be a nurse. That's a great job. You'll be able to retire from that. And that's all based on the assumption that as the baby boomers get older, they're going to need to be taken care of. So every school I've dealt with have had impacted nursing programs. But again, that could change tomorrow too, so these things, yes, these are things that are taken into consideration, but they're constantly changing and they're out of the control of the job seeker. So that's not a good place to make your, foundation for making all your decisions. Okay. So again, those are some of the handouts that I had that you can download from my website. And that's this right here. Again, everything I've shown you, you can find here. I encourage you to check this out. I would be more than happy and welcome any feedback or any questions anybody has. Tell me what they think of this. And I had several people tell me they were surprised I was willing to offer this topic for free. And my attitude is I already had this topic. I even had the web page for it from a few years ago. And with the world changing, it's very stressful. And I figured this is something I can contribute to our country is that other people don't have to learn everything the hard way like I did. So, for those of you who want to support these people, here's some information, and hopefully you can use this to be more effective at what you do. Again, thank you for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful day.